Chapter 14 Interlude with Sunflowers. Not far ahead, there were mountains. Lewis had flown all night and well into the morning. He wasn't sure how long. The motionless noon sun was a psychological trap. It either compressed or stretched time, and Lewis wasn't sure which. Emotionally, Lewis was on sabbatical. He had almost forgotten the other fly cycles. Flying alone over unending, endlessly changing terrain was no different from ranging alone in a single ship beyond the known stars. Lewis Wu was alone with the universe, and the universe was a plaything for Lewis Wu. The most important question in the universe became, is Lewis Wu still satisfied with himself? It came as a shock when a furry orange face formed above the dash. "You must be tiring," said the Gazin. "Do you wish me to fly?" "I'd rather land. I'm getting cramped." "Land, then. The controls are yours." "I don't want to force my company on anyone." As he said it, Lewis realized he meant it. The sabbatical mood had been too easily recaptured. "Do you feel that Tila would avoid you? You may be right. She has not called even me, though I share her shame." "You're taking it too hard." "No, wait, don't switch off." "I wish to be alone, Lewis. The Leaf Eater has shamed me terribly." "But it was so long ago." "No, don't switch off. Have pity on a lonely old man. Have you been watching the landscape?" "Yes." "Did you notice the bare regions?" "Yes. In places, erosion has cut through bedrock to the indestructible ring floor. Something must have badly upset the wind patterns a very long time ago. Such erosion cannot happen overnight, even on the Ringworld." "Right." "Lewis, how could a civilization of such size and power fall?" "I don't know. Let's face it, there's no way to guess, not for us. Even the puppeteers never reached the Ringworld's level of technology. How can we tell what might have knocked them back to the first axe level?" We must learn more about the natives," said Speaker to Animals. "Our evidence thus far indicates that they could not possibly move the ruined lyre anywhere. We must find those who can." It was the opening Lewis had hoped for. "I have some ideas on that score. An effective way to contact the natives as often as we like." "Well?" "I'd like to land before we talk it over." "Land, then." Mountains formed a high, blocky range across the path of the fly-cycle fleet. Their peaks and the passes between glowed with a pearly sheen Lewis recognized. Winds roared over and between the peaks, had polished away the rock, exposing the framework of ring floor material. Lewis dropped the fleet toward gently rounded foothills. His target was the mouth of a silver stream that poured out of the mountains and disappeared into a forest, itself seemingly endless, that covered the foothills like green fur. Tila called. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "I'm landing. I'm tired of flying, but don't hang up. I'd like to apologize." She switched off. Best I could hope for, Lewis told himself without conviction, but she would be more willing to listen now that she knew an apology was coming. "I got the idea from all our talk about playing God," said Lewis. Unfortunately, he was talking only to Speaker. Tila had dismounted her cycle, thrown him one smoking glare, and stalked off into the woods. Speaker nodded his shaggy orange head. His ears twitched like small Chinese fans held in nervous fingers. "We're reasonably safe on this world," Lewis told him, "as long as we're in the air. There's no question but that we can get where we're going." We could probably reach the rim wall without ever landing if it came to that, or we could land only where the ring foundation pokes through. No predatory life could survive on that stuff. But we can't learn much without landing. We want to get off this oversized toy, and to do that we're going to need native help. It still looks as though someone is going to have to haul the lyre across 400,000 miles of landscape. Get to the point, Lewis. I need exercise. By the time we reach the rim wall, we'll want to know a lot more about the Ringworlders than we do now. Unquestionably. Why not play God? Speaker hesitated. You speak with literal precision. Right, we're naturals for Ringworld engineers. We don't have the powers they had, but what we do have must look godlike enough to the natives. You can be the god. Thank you. Tila and I the acolytes. Nessus would make a good captive demon. Speaker's claws came out. He said, But Nessus is not with us, and will not be. That's the hitch. This is not open to argument, Lewis. Too bad. We need him to make this work. Then you must forget it. Lewis was still in doubt about those claws. Were they or were they not under voluntary control? In any case, they were still showing. Had he been speaking over intercom, Speaker would certainly have switched off by now. Which was why Lewis had insisted on landing. Look at the sheer intellectual beauty of it. You'd make a great god. From a human viewpoint, you're impressive as all hell, though I suppose you'd have to take my word for that. Why would we need Nessus? For the task, for reward and punishment. As a god, you tear a doubter to shreds and gobbets, then eat the gobbets. That's punishment. For reward, you use the puppeteer's task. Can we not do without the task? But it's such a great way to reward the faithful. A blast of pure pleasure straight to the brain. No side effects, no hangover. A task is supposed to be better than sex. I do not like the ethics. Though the natives are only human, I would not like to addict them to a task. It would be more merciful to kill them, said Speaker. In any case, the puppeteer's task works against Kazinti, not human. I think you're wrong. Lewis, we know that the task was designed for use against a Kazinti brain structure. I felt it. In this, you are right. It was a religious experience, a diabolical experience. But we don't know the task doesn't work on a human being. I think it does. I know Nessus. Either his task works on both of us, or he's carrying two tasks. I wouldn't be here unless he had a way to control humans. You speculate wildly. Shall we call him and ask him? No. What's the harm in asking him? There would be no purpose in it. I forgot. No curiosity, said Lewis. Monkey curiosity was not powerful in most sentient species. Were you playing on my curiosity? I see. You tried to commit me to a course of action. Lewis the puppeteer may find his own way to the rim wall. Until then, he travels alone. And before Lewis could answer, the Kazin turned and bound into a thicket of elbow root. It ended the discussion as effectively as if he had switched off an intercom. The world had caved in on Tila Brown. She sobbed miserably, rackingly, in an orgy of self-pity. She had found a wonderful place for her mourning. Dark green was the motif. The vegetation was lush overhead, too thick to permit the direct passage of sunlight, but it thinned out near the ground to make walking easy. It was a somber paradise to nature lovers. Flat, vertical rock walls kept constantly wet by a waterfall surrounded a deep, clear pool. Tila was in the pool. The falling water nearly drowned out her sobbing, but the rock walls amplified the sound like a shower stall. It was as if nature wept with her. She had not noticed Louis Wu. Stranded on an alien world, even Tila Brown would not have gone far without her first aid kit. It was a small, flat box on her belt, and it had a finder circuit built into it. Louis had followed its signal to Tila's clothes, which were piled on a natural granite tabletop at the pool's edge. Dark green illumination, the roar of the waterfall, and the echoed sound of sobbing. Tila was almost under the falling water. She must be sitting on something, for her arms and shoulders were out of the pool. Her head was bent, and her dark hair streamed forward to cover her face. There was no point in waiting for her to come to him. Louis took off his clothes, piled them beside Tila's. He frowned at the chill in the air, shrugged, and dove in. He saw his mistake instantly. On sabbatical, Louis did not commonly run across Earth-like worlds. Those he did land on were generally as civilized as Earth itself. Louis was not stupid, if it had occurred to him to wonder about the temperature of the water. But it didn't. The water was runoff water from snow-capped mountains. Louis tried to scream with the cold, but his head was already underwater. He did have sense enough not to inhale. His head broke water. He splashed and gasped with the cold and the need for air. Then he began to enjoy it. He knew how to tread water, though he had learned in warmer waters than these. He stayed afloat, kicking rhythmically, feeling the currents from the plunging waterfall eddy over his skin. Tila had seen him. She sat beneath the waterfall waiting. He swam to her. He would have to scream into her face to tell her anything. Apologies and words of love would have been misplaced. But he could touch her. She did not flinch away, but she bent her head and her hair hid her again. Her rejection was almost telepathically intense. Louis respected it. He swam about, stretching muscles cramped by 18 hours in a fly-cycle seat. The water felt wonderful, but at some point the numbness of the cold became an ache, and Louis decided he was courting pneumonia. He touched Tila on the arm and pointed towards shore. This time she nodded and followed. They lay beside the pool, shivering, wrapped in each other's arms with the thermo-controlled coveralls open and spread around them like blankets. Gradually their chilled bodies soaked up the heat. "I'm sorry I laughed," Louis said. She nodded, accepting the fact of his apology without forgiveness. "It was funny, you know. The puppeteers, the cowards of the universe, having the gall to breed humans and Kzinti like two strains of cattle. They must have known what a chance they were taking." He knew he was talking too much, but he had to explain, to justify himself. And then look what they did with it. Breeding for a reasonable Kzin, that wasn't a bad idea. I know a little about the Man-Kzin wars. I know the Kzinti used to be pretty fierce. Speaker's ancestors would have blasted Zignamo-Click-Click down to the ring floor. Speaker stopped. But breeding humans for luck, you think they made a mistake making me what I am? Oh, excuse me, that was supposed to be Tila. You think they made a mistake making me what I am? Tangent, do you think I'm trying to insult you? I'm trying to say that it's a funny idea. For puppeteers to do it is even funnier. So I laughed. Do you expect me to giggle? That'd be going too far. All right. She didn't hate him for laughing. She wanted comfort, not revenge. There was comfort in the heat of the coveralls, and comfort in the heat of two bodies pressed together. Lewis began to stroke Tila's back. It made her relax. "I'd like to get the expedition back together again," he said presently. He felt her stiffen. "You don't like that idea?" "No." "Nessus?" "I hate him. I hate him. He bred my ancestors like beasts." She relaxed minutely. "But Speaker would blast him out of the sky if he tried to come back, so it's all right." "Suppose I could talk Speaker into letting Nessus rejoin us." "How could you do that?" "Suppose I could." "But why?" "Nessus still owns the Longshot. The Longshot is the only way to get the human race to the clouds of Magellan in less than centuries. We lose the Longshot if we leave the Ringworld without Nessus." How crass, Lewis." "Look, you claimed that if the puppeteers hadn't done what they did to the Kzinti, we'd all be Kzinti slaves. True. But if the puppeteers hadn't interfered with the fertility laws, you wouldn't even have been born." She was rigid against him. Her mind showed in her face, and her face was like her eyes, tightly closed. He kept trying. "What the puppeteers did, they did a long time ago. Can't you forgive and forget?" "No." She rolled away from him, out from under the heated coveralls and into the icy water. Lewis hesitated, then followed her. A cold, wet shock. He surfaced. Tila was back in her place beneath the waterfall, smiling in invitation. How could her moods change so suddenly? He swam to her. "That's a charming way to tell a man to shut up," he laughed. She couldn't possibly have heard him. He couldn't hear himself, with the water pounding down around them. But Tila laughed back, equally soundlessly, and reached for him. "They were stupid arguments anyway," he screamed. The water was cold. Tila was the only warmth. They knelt, clasping each other, supported by rough, shallow, underwater rock. Love was a delicious blend of warm and cold. There was comfort in making love. It solved no problems, but one could run away from problems. They walked back toward the cycles, shivering a little within their heated cocoons. Lewis didn't speak. He had realized a thing about Tila Brown. She had never learned how to reject. She could not say no and make it stick. She could not deliver reproofs of calculated intensity, humors, or jabbing, or deadly vicious as any other woman could. Tila Brown had not been hurt socially, not often enough to learn these things. Lewis could browbeat her until doomsday and she would not know how to stop him, but she could hate him for it. And so he remained silent, for that reason and for another. He didn't want to hurt her. They walked in silence, holding hands, making love play with their fingers. "All right," she said suddenly. "If you can talk Speaker into it, you can bring Nessus back." "Thanks," said Lewis. He showed his surprise. "It's only for the long shot," she said. "Besides, you can't do it." There was time for a meal and for formal exercises, push-ups and sit-ups, and for informal exercises, tree climbing. Presently, Speaker returned to the cycles. His mouth was not bloody. At his cycle he dialed, not for an allergy pill, but for a wet, brick-shaped slab of warm liver. The mighty hunter returns, Lewis thought, keeping his mouth firmly shut. The sky had been overcast when they landed. It was still overcast, a uniform leaden gray as they took off, and Lewis resumed his argument by intercom. "But it was so long ago. of honor is not affected by time, Lewis, though of course you would not know that. Further, the consequences of the act are very much with us. Why did Nessus select a Kazin to travel with him? He told us that. Why did he select Tila Brown? The hindmost must have instructed Nessus to learn if humans have inherited a psychic luck. He was also to learn if Kazinti have become docile. He chose me because as ambassador to a characteristically arrogant species, I am likely to demonstrate the docility his people seek. I thought of that too. Lewis had carried the idea even further. Had Nessus been instructed to mention starseed lures in order to gauge Speaker's reactions? It matters not. I say that I am not docile. Will you stop using that word? It warps your thinking. Lewis, why do you intercede for the puppeteer? Why do you wish his company? Good question, Lewis thought. Certainly the puppeteer deserved to sweat a little. And if what Lewis suspected was true, Nessus was in no danger at all. Was it only Lewis Wu that liked aliens? Or was it more general than that? A puppeteer was different. Difference was important. A man of Lewis Wu's age would get bored with life itself without variety. To Lewis, the company of aliens was a vital necessity. The cycles rose following the slope of the mountains. Viewpoints, said Lewis Wu. We're in a strange environment, stranger than any world of men or Kazin. We may need all the insights we can bring to bear just to figure out what's going on. Tila applauded without sound. Nicely argued, Lewis winked back. A very human conversation. Speaker couldn't possibly read its meaning. The Kazin was saying, I do not need a puppeteer to explain the world to me. My own eyes, nose, ears are sufficient. That's moot. But you do need the long shot. We all need the techniques that ship represents. For profit, an unworthy motive. Tangent, that's not fair. The long shot is for the entire human race, and the Kazinti too. A quibble. Though the profit is not to you alone, still you sell your honor for profit. My honor is not in danger, Lewis grated. I think it is, said Speaker, and he switched off. That's a handy little gadget, that switch, Tila observed with malice. I knew he'd do that. So did I, but Lord Finnegal, he's hard to convince. Beyond the mountains was an endless expanse of fleecy cloud, graying out at the infinity horizon. The fly cycles seemed to float above white cloud, beneath a bright blue sky in which the arch was an outline at the threshold of visibility. The mountain fell behind. Lewis felt a twinge of regret for the forest pool with the waterfall. They would never see it again. A wake followed the cycles, a roiling wavefront where 3 sonic booms touched the cloud cover. Ahead, only one detail broke the infinity horizon. Lewis decided that it was either a mountain or a storm, very distant, very large. It was the size of a pinhead held at arm's length. Speaker broke the silence. A rift in the cloud cover, Lewis, ahead and to spinward. I see it. Do you see how the light shines through? Much light is being reflected from the landscape. True, the edges of the cloud break glowed brightly. Could we be flying over Ringworld Foundation material? It would be the biggest break yet in the landscaping. I want to look more closely. Good, said Lewis. He watched the speck that was Speaker's fly cycle curve frantically away to spinward. At Mach 2, Speaker would get no more than a glimpse of the ground. There was a problem here. Which to watch? The silver fleck that was Speaker's fly cycle, or the small orange cat face above the dash? One was real, one was detailed. Both offered information, but of different kinds. In principle, no answer was entirely satisfactory. In practice, Lewis naturally watched both. He saw that Speaker was over the rift. The intercom echoed Speaker's yowl. The silver fleck had gone suddenly brighter, and Speaker's face had a glare of white light. His eyes were closed tight. His mouth was open, screaming. The image dimmed. Speaker had crossed the rift. One arm was thrown across his face. The fur that covered him was smoking black char. Beneath the diverging silver speck of Speaker's fly cycle, a bright spot showed on the cloud cover, as if a spotlight followed Speaker from below. "Speaker," Tila called, "can you see?" Speaker heard and uncovered his face. The orange fur was unburned in a broad band across his eyes. Elsewhere the fur was ash black. Speaker opened his eyes, closed them tight, opened them again. "I'm blind," he said. "Yes, but can you see?" In his worry over Speaker, Lewis hardly noticed the strangeness of that question, but something in him noted her tone of voice, the anxiety, and beneath that, the suggestion that Speaker had given a wrong answer and should be given a second chance. But there wasn't time. Lewis called, "Speaker, slave your cycle to mine, we've got to get to cover." Speaker fumbled at the board. "Done. Lewis, what kind of cover?" Pain thickened and distorted his voice. "Back to the mountains." "No, we would lose too much time. Lewis, I know what attacked me. If I am right, then we are safe as long as we have cloud cover." "Oh, you will have to investigate. You need medical attention." "I do indeed, but first you must find us a safe place to land. You must descend where the clouds are most dense." It was not dark down here below the clouds. Some light came through, and enough of what was reflected toward Lewis Wu. It glared. The land was an undulating plain. It was not ring floor material, but soil and vegetation. Lewis dropped lower, squinting against the glare. A single species of plant, evenly dispersed across the land, from here to the infinity horizon. Each plant had a single blossom, and each blossom turned to follow Lewis Wu as he dropped. A tremendous audience, silent and attentive. He landed and dismounted beside one of the plants. The plant stood a foot high on a knobbly green stalk. Its single blossom was as big as a large man's face. The back of that blossom was stringy, as if laced with veins or tendons, and the inner surface was a smooth, concave mirror. From its center protruded a short stalk, ending in a dark green bulb. All the flowers in sight watched him. He was bathed in the glare. Lewis knew they were trying to kill him, and he looked up somewhat uneasily. But the cloud cover held. "You were right," he said, speaking into the intercom. "They're slaver sunflowers. If the cloud cover hadn't come up, we'd have been dead the instant we rose over the mountains." "Is there cover where we can hide from the sunflowers? A cave, for example?" "I don't think so. The land's too flat. The sunflowers can't focus the light in any precision, but there's a lot of glare anyway." Tila broke in. "For pity's sake, what's the matter with you two? Lewis, we've got to land. Speaker's in pain." "Truly, I am in pain, Lewis." "Then I vote we risk it. Come down, you two. We'll just have to hope the clouds hold." "Good." Tila's intercom image went into action. Lewis spent a minute or so searching between the plants. It was as he surmised. There was no alien survivor anywhere in the domain of the sunflowers. No smaller plant grew between the stalks. Nothing flew. Nothing burrowed beneath the ashy-looking soil. On the plants themselves there were no blights, fungus growths, disease spots. If disease struck one of their own, the sunflowers would destroy it. The mirror blossom was a terrible weapon. Its primary purpose was to focus sunlight on the green photosynthetic node at its center. But it could also focus to destroy a plant-eating animal or insect. The sunflower burned all enemies. Everything that lives is the enemy of a photosynthesis-using plant, and everything that lived became fertilizer for the sunflowers. But how did they come here, Lewis wondered, for sunflowers could not coexist with less exotic plant life. Sunflowers were too powerful. They could not be native to the Ringworlders' original planet. The engineers must have scouted nearby stars for their useful or decorative plants. Perhaps they had even come as far as Silver Eyes in human space, and they must have decided that the sunflowers were decorative. But they would have fenced them in. Any idiot would have had that much sense. Give them, say, a plot of ground with a high, broad ring of bare ring flooring around it. That would keep them in. Only it didn't. Somehow seed got across. No telling how far they've spread by now, said Lewis to himself, and he shuddered. This must be the bright spot he and Nessus had noticed ahead of them. As far as the eye could see, no living thing challenged the sunflowers. In time, if they were given time, the sunflowers would rule the Ringworld. But that would take much time. The Ringworld was roomy enough for anything.